Well, as you may have guessed from the bulletin, yeah, the sermon title is a little bit sarcastic. Because if you're asking the question, well, what do I get out of it? The truth is, you're not convicted about what's going on. You're after what you can get out of it. And yes, there is a way that this title is actually right. But to get to that point, we have to have a better understanding of what comes before it. And that's what God asks of us. So I'm going to do something I don't normally do. I'm going to tell a preacher story. Usually when I get up here and tell a story, I tell a real story. One based out of my life and my kids' lives, because then I know the certainty of what took place. But in this case, I'm going to tell a preacher story, and I'm going to keep it short. I'm going to do the abridged version of it. And kid's growing up, and he's graduating. And what he really, really wants when he graduates as his graduation gift is this car. And his dad's an executive with this company. His dad makes good money. And he lets dad know on a regular basis, hint, 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 what I'd like for graduation is a car. And graduation comes and he graduates. And his dad says, I got you what you needed the most. And he hands it over. And the kid looks at it, tears off the cover. It's a Bible. Dad says, you're going to find what you need in that word. Kid slams the Bible down on the floor, walks out. Doesn't talk to his dad for about 10 years. His dad tries to call him, tries to send him mail, and it comes back returned, doesn't answer the phone calls. His dad dies of cancer. So he goes back to dad's house because he's an only child. There on the living room floor where he threw it down was the Bible. It wasn't touched, there's dust on it. He decides he'll pick it up. And when he opens it to the middle, there was the check for the price of the car. There's what he wanted. There's what he needed. And he wasn't going to really understand the difference between the two until he learned what was in the book. The truth about understanding what we get out of it, you don't get it like you don't get the check. Insofar as a check doesn't tell you how much a parent really cares. It's just a cheapo little piece of paper that isn't worth what the numbers and zeros, etc., imply about it. The worth comes by what backs it. The worth of what we get out of it comes by what backs it. So both were tied to hope. He hoped he was getting the car. His father had a different hope for him. And truth is, only one of the two things he received was ever going to actually accomplish anything in his life. So today we're going to look at how two different men acted with respect to godly hope. And hint, one showed no respect. And we're going to start off with that one, Saul, the king. And we see in 1 Samuel 9:17 that he was selected by God. And it says, when Samuel saw Saul, the Lord told him, here's the man of whom I spoke to you. He it is who shall rule over my people. That's pretty awesome that God specifically picked Saul out. And moving forward a bit, Saul gets to witness God's power directly in his own life. If we look at 1 Samuel 10, 1 through 6. Samuel took a vial of oil and poured it on his head and kissed him and said, the Lord has anointed you ruler over his people Israel. You shall reign over the people, and the Lord, I missed my line there. You shall reign over the people of the Lord, and you will save them from the hand of their enemies all around. Now this shall be a sign to you that the Lord has anointed you ruler over his heritage. When you depart from me today, you will meet 2 men by Rachel's tomb in the territory of Benjamin of Zelos. They will say to you, the donkeys that you went to seek are found, and now your father has stopped worrying about them and is worrying about you, saying, what shall I do about my son? Then you shall go on from there farther and come to the oak by Tabor. 3 men going up to God at Bethel will meet you there. One carrying 3 kids, another carrying 3 loaves of bread, and another carrying a skin of wine. They will greet you and will give you 2 loaves of bread, which you shall accept from them. After that, you shall come to Gebeth Elam, at the place where the Philistine garrison is. Remember that one. There, as you come to town, you will meet a band of prophets coming down from the shrine with harp, tambourine, flute, and lyre playing in front of them. And they will be in a prophetic frenzy. Then the Spirit of the Lord will possess you, and you will be in a prophetic frenzy along with them and be turned into a different person. You've heard about demonic possession? Okay, this is on the flip side of it. This is possession from God's side of it. Because based on what little we do know about Saul, he's not the kind of guy to just get down with his God self. He's the timid guy. He's not going to go dancing around and doing something he's never done before, except this once. To make sure that Saul has no question in his mind, there is a God. And it's not just that he's going to be possessed. He's getting told what's going to happen before it happens. So he has a reason to not only be happy that, 1, I've been selected by God. 2, he knows personally there is a God. He is active. He's powerful. And his control goes way beyond mine. And then there's where Saul throws away his hope. In 1 Samuel 13, 8 through 9, it says, he waited 7 days, the time appointed by Samuel. But Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and the people began to slip away from Saul. And just a quick backup here. Saul, the Israelites are quasi at war with the Philistines. I say quasi, because there's only 2 people in the whole Israelite nation that have swords. Jonathan and Saul. And that garrison that we just read about in that other chapter, Jonathan, with a smaller band of men, take out that garrison. Garrison. That means armed with packed with soldiers who are armed. Versus Jonathan with a sword, and everybody else carrying their hoes, their rakes. Maybe some of them have an axe, but truth is, push come to shove, given the choice between an axe and a sword, I want the sword. Sword, stab. Axe, you got to pull on back to get anything of consequence out of that swing. While you're pulling on back, the guy with the sword just goes poke, 1 down, and moves on. Jonathan and his group took out the garrison. Saul is with the section of people larger than what Jonathan had. And he was told, wait here 7 days. I'll be there on the 7th day to offer the sacrifice. Verse 9, though, we find out that doesn't happen. So Saul said, bring the burnt offering here to me and the offerings of well-being, and he offered the burnt offering. The law is already written. He's not the one who's supposed to be making the offering. Essentially what he's doing is he's pulling a pagan maneuver. Because, okay, if we can't do this the right way, well, at least I'll appease God by making a sacrifice to him. Because that's what all the pagans did. You want to make sure you're not going to get in trouble? Make a sacrifice. You want to make sure things go good? Make a sacrifice. You want. I do as far as making the sacrifice. What I want. And what Saul wanted at that moment was to get it into battle and get going. And by not following through with what he should have done and waited. Because the day wasn't over. And I'll tell you what happens in the very next verse. The very next verse, as soon as that sacrifice starts, guess who shows up? Samuel. Shows up the day that he was supposed to show up, just not in Saul's time. And if you think about the reasons why he threw it all away, or this is when he begins to throw it all away, but first reason, fear of life. These guys are deserting me. If I don't get this fight going soon, I might not have enough guys to win with. Fear for his power. I'm king. Except if I don't have people following me, then I'm not really quite king any longer. Third, public opinion. It's all departing from him. They're deserting him because he can't pull this off. He was never going to be the one who was going to pull it off. Like I said, how did Jonathan win the battle against the garrison? With one sword. How is Jonathan later on in life gonna win? Jonathan, his armor bearer, two of them going uphill, and when they get to the top of the hill, killing Philistines. If he had waited, meaning Saul, and it had gotten down to just Saul and a handful of men, Samuel shows up, offers the sacrifice. Who was going to win that battle? God was going to win that battle for Saul. Who was going to get the credit and the glory in the eyes of the people? Saul would. Saul would become the king that everybody talked about David being. He'd have gotten the recognition because he would have stood his ground as a man of God, and when God said it's okay to go forward because the sacrifice was made, he could have had everything he feared he would lose. But instead, Saul did it his way. He wanted the reward without the work, because I don't want to have to be there by myself. And instead, he gets nothing ultimately. Then we have Jesus. Like I said, there's two. He was identified as God's son. Matthew 3:17, a voice from heaven said, "This is my son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased." Again, direct. This is the one. That's a good start. And again, God's power was shown. Matthew 4:23 through 24. Jesus went throughout Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and curing every disease and every sickness among the people. So his fame spread throughout all Syria, and they brought to him all the sick, those who were afflicted with various diseases and pains and demonics and epileptics and paralytics, and he cured them. Sort of hard to miss the presence of God's power there. Many in the world chose to miss it. But there's that reassurance. And I'm talking about Jesus here. It wasn't just came down, was told, "Yes, you're my son." Came down, was told, "Yes, you're my son, and I am backing the things you're teaching by the signs I will show through you and through those who follow you." But unlike Saul, Jesus had a bit of a different mindset. And it wasn't just his own, it was one he taught. Because in Matthew 6:10, "Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." Your will, the Father's will. Not just teaching it, but praying it. Asking, your will be done where? Who's offering the prayer? Jesus. So in whose life? In Jesus' life. He's asking whatever, no, your will be done. take the time sometime, read through the Lord's Prayer, and think about what Jesus is asking for in biblical terms. Your will be done. Give us this day our daily bread. What did Jesus say was the bread he had that the apostles weren't aware of? With the Samaritan woman, it was to do the will of God. Give us this day the things you will us to do, the opportunity to act in faith in you, God, that we may grow in our faith by acting. And then we find in Matthew 26:39, this is just before the cross, going a little farther, he threw himself on the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me, yet not what I want, but what you want." It wasn't just he said it, he lived it. He lived it no matter what the price. He didn't want death on the cross as far as the physical pain and what he was going to have to go through. It says it right there. If there's another way around, I am so down with a different answer right now, because this isn't what I want to experience. I know pain. I was a carpenter. I know what the hammer feels like when I hit it and it hits my thumb and there's not a nail going through my thumb. I know what it hurts like when the slivers go into me or I get cut. It's not my idea of fun. And I understand a cross is a whole lot worse. So yeah, he had a reason, like us. Because I'm not the one saying nail me to a cross. It's not my jolly. I get the pain, and so did he. But bigger than the pain was the hope that he knew and understood that would be accomplished through facing the cross. And we find out God's intention, Matthew 28:18. And Jesus came and said to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me." The cross wasn't an end. It was an end with respect to the old covenant. It was the beginning with respect to the New Testament. It had to occur, and we discussed this in great detail this morning in the men's class. But it was something that Jesus understood, that for God's will to be accomplished, yeah, I got to go there. No matter what I'm thinking about in this moment. That's the road I'm going to travel down. And with God's intention, yes, Jesus faced loss of life and freely gave it. Power-wise, he never was one of those worldly authorities. There's only 120 that are there waiting on the day of Pentecost that followed him that far. But worldly power and authority wasn't what it was ever about. As far as public opinion, that wasn't on his radar, because he was seen with the tax collectors. Ooh, worse than a prostitute or a sinner. And of course, he was seen with the prostitutes and the sinners. He was seen with all the wrong crowds. Why? Because they were the ones willing to listen. They were the ones that were willing to repent. Everything that Saul thought was so important that he had to go forward with God was the reason why he, Jesus, had to wait for God's right answer to be able to go forward at all. Jesus followed the will for the hope that was set before him. He wasn't hoping for the cross. He was hoping for what it would bring about. And there's a hard truth, and we read it at the beginning of services. Romans 8:26-30. Likewise, the Spirit helps us in our weakness, for we do not know how to pray as we ought, but that very Spirit intercedes with sighs too deep for words, and God, who searches the heart, knows what is in the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. We know that all things work together for good for those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that he might be the firstborn within a large family. And those whom he predestined, he also called. And before I move on to the last part, 29 is where we struggle. Those whom he knew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son. And unfortunately, we don't take it all the way to what that says too often. Finishing off, and those whom he called, he also justified. And those whom he justified, he also glorified. And unfortunately, we put this part at the end and separate it from what I just reemphasized in the middle. Because in conforming our will, like the Son conformed his will to the Father, he was justified. Because whose will was it? It was the Father's will. And he wasn't just justified, he was glorified. We will be, I'm sorry, not we will be. We are justified. When? Now. Because to die right now, what sin is there on my record? None. I have been made right. How? By the blood of Christ. That which was against my ledger as far as sin went is no more. It is not seen because of the blood of Christ. Excuse me. Also glorified. Because what am I reflecting when I am conformed to the image of Christ? I'm reflecting God. I'm being glorified not because of myself, but because of that which my life should be reflecting. When I am conformed to the Son. And conformed to the image of God's Son or the Father's Son is a high standard. I get that. But we have page after page of both good and bad examples. And yes, we need to learn from the bad example, Saul. That just because it looks darkest before the dawn doesn't mean there isn't a dawn on the other side that is far more glorious than we could have imagined, when all we can see is everybody's deserting me. I'm not taking a popular stand, and if I open my mouth because of what I believe in, they're not going to think so hot of me. I might be excluded. I might lose my job. I might stand firm for what I believe, regardless of the cost. Why? To become heirs with the Father's Son. And I'm not talking about heaven here. I'm talking about standing side by side with the one who paid it all. And to be counted worthy to be associated with him. I don't care about heaven. Somebody once made the statement, well, if Jesus wasn't in heaven, wouldn't you want to be? No. I am convicted of the truth he lived. And I will never back down from that. I could be the toilet scrubber in heaven for all I care, if you count me as one with Jesus. Being conformed to his image isn't about the goodies we get in the end. It's about learning what real worth comes from, what real value comes from. And we don't find that in the images of heaven. We find that in the life of Christ. It's easy to understand a preacher's story. They're short. Hopefully sometimes they're sweet and to the point. And it's easy to understand the value of a new car or a check that's got lots of zeros written on it after a one or something. We get that. But life isn't easy, and it takes more than a simple preacher story to get us through the hard times. We need to have the understanding that is so strong, so powerful, that we're able to say, not my will, but yours be done. And that wasn't even an easy answer for Jesus. Which is why we need to study, study, study. And we need to apply, apply, apply. So we can learn and understand and grow, and in growing conform to the image of the Son. He lived a life of example to show us how to live a true life for eternity. Becoming Christ-like is more than just words, just like taking up our cross daily is more than just words. We grow in God's good when we grow in His Word. And where is our hope? It's in His Word. They say anything worth having, it's worth working for. Do we believe it? Are we willing to work for the hope that we profess? Because like I said at the very beginning, yeah, the title was a bit sarcastic, but there's a deeper truth to it. When we've worked through it, we'll understand the hope the same way Jesus understood it. We will grow and we will understand what's in it for us in godly terms instead of worldly ones. Romans 8, 26 through 30. If you need to take on Christ or you need the prayers of the church, you're welcome to come as we stand and sing.